What's up, Spirit Squad? Welcome back to another video. If you're new, thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to be continuing on with the Ascending Goddess. We're on chapter 3, so let's go ahead and get started. This part is called The Opening of the Lotus. It says, a lotus lived in the heart, identifying with it as one concept. Yet it represented a closed bud, where 9 small petals were fused into a single whole, and only 3 resembled the quivering rays potentially ready to unfold. Each of the 12 petals was appointed its own period of awakening, but for the time being, they should stay quiet in the breast, grouped as 4 triads. The immortal flame found shelter in the heart. It was this flame that nourished the lotus closed within the breast, serving as fertile soil, irrigating with moisture, the sun radiating warmth. The flower did not know the decrease of the currents generously being poured forth upon it, and so it was growing, not from day to day, but from hour to hour. But the bud was invisible, and it was possible to discern it on the subtle level alone, for it had been woven from the subtlest matter. This resplendent lotus stretched its roots into the beneficial depths, whose role was performed by the simple physical heart, beating in time within the dense human body. In this way, the mortal structure supplied the currents of life to the immortal creation. The perishable was laboring in the name of the imperishable. Through the stalk, which secured the roots of the flower, with its bud like a silver thread, the streams of beneficial effusions were flowing, increasingly the might of the core that nourished the crown of the closed petals. Thus, for both roots and stem, it was necessary to supply the currents of particular combinations, which enabled a harmonious vibration to be established within the bud. The highly concordant rhythm of breathing must be maintained among all the petals, although each of them had its own specific task of development and different periods of unfoldment. But the first 3 had already been breathing, ready to manifest their colors, for the hour had now struck for one of them. It carried much from the perishable world within itself, and it was therefore destined to unfold into the dust, which at that time was the human brain. The petal gave a shudder, and a thrill ran through its entire fragile structure. The emerald ray touched it, affirming the call of life in each of its tiny cells, and it began to unfold, subject to the behest of the forces of nature. The petal was already aware it was destined to give knowledge, for the triad it represented was the bearer of the supreme knowledge. In the 3-dimensional world, the first measure of the manifestation of life was the point that brought forth the fiery pulsation within itself. But once the first thread is pulled, the whole little ball starts to unwind. The impulse for unfoldment has passed through, flaring like the brightest lightning in the depths of the closed bud, and its emerald hue has poured forth all over the world, establishing itself as the dominant note. Growth, development, and upward striving has characterized the period associated with the opening of the first petal. Life has begun a new round of evolutionary development. The human heart is no longer the heart of an animal. The first petal of the heart's lotus, while opening, now serves as a transitional bridge from the kingdom of 4-pawed creatures into the kingdom of 2-legged beings that still hang onto so many traits which could hardly be called human. Yet human beings themselves do not represent the crown of creation. They are the path providing passage from the lower state to the higher. To take yet another step towards a higher rung was possible for them only when the next petal unfolded. However, for this, they needed to know much and so people set about studying the surrounding world. The whole triad was touched by the pulsation of life, and with one pulled by another, it slowly began to disclose its inherent possibilities. Possibilities. As human beings distanced themselves further and further from packs of beasts, they gradually acquired a more human appearance, which already, though surreptitiously, bore within itself the features of destiny. The 3 petals of knowledge opened, gradually revealing those who were prepared to become the bearers of the unsealed truth. But these were very few, and almost all of them came into this world from other systems, keeping their memories of cosmic knowledge. They were of great help to those who fell behind in the path of evolutionary development. Yet, they could not influence the unfoldment of petals of the heart's lotus by any artificial measures, until people themselves aspired to this. One needed to awaken the petals of the next triad, so as to acquire the power of heartfelt fires, for the knowledge gained was still not derived from the fiery heart, but from the surrounding world. The next petals brought divine love, and this was known to all who possessed the gift of wise insight. Yes, with love, they were willing to share their knowledge, so that, after elevating to all their own level of consciousness, they themselves could rise even higher. How was it possible to impact knowledge without relying on the heart, if the heart served as the soil for the fiery lotus, a place where the closed petals could actually rest? Conversation could proceed only from heart to heart. However, it was possible to talk with the heart only in the language of love, for it did not understand any other tongues. And of course, such a dialogue could take place not at the level of physical hearts woven from perishable threads, but at the level of the subtlest planes. Only the conscious of vibrations could lead to Only the consonance of vibrations could lead to mutual understanding. Who managed to unfold the first petal of the second triad? Of course, it was the woman indeed. Indeed, she was the first to step upon terra firma, leaving behind the heavenly waters and the marvelous lotus created by the hand of the Most High. She absorbed the image of the wondrous bud, and she revealed the petal of love to the world. And there is nothing strange in the fact that this woman was called goddess. The white Tara, the goddess of love, Lakshmi, was, is, and will be her name. And the memory of her will live as long as the lotus of fiery love blossoms within human hearts. And it is immortal, just as the goddess of the world herself is immortal. So that's the first part. We'll be right back with the second part. Okay, chapter 3, section 2. The invisible petals of the lotus surrounded Lakshmi, the first woman to emerge from the waters, on all sides. They seemed to be accompanying her, snugly joined around a single core. Any hostile invasion from the outside was unthinkable, for it would immediately run up against the invisible shield of the transparent petals that protected the earthly flesh of their beloved goddess. Everything in the world breathes in obedience to the one law of creation. The terra firma of the earth was breathing too, and her breast first rose, then fell, conforming to the rhythm of cosmic breath. All that was seen as weightless and agile was full of live, quivering, had to make sure I read that right, was full of live quivering, which clearly demonstrated the processes invisibly occurring within. But the outward stillness of the stone could be deceiving to non-penetrating eyes. Indeed, the stone was breathing as well, yet its breath was so smooth that the rise and fall of its form was impossible for the eye to watch. What could hide from the all-seeing eye of Lakshmi? Her cosmic sight was still quite sharp. She could see everything, right down to the processes occurring in the Earth's core, which was also breathing fires. What does all that exists breathe for? And why does the cessation of breathing mean death? It is clear that the Earth, being subject to cosmic law, lives according to the provisions prescribed for her. In her breast was embedded the fire which always breathes, and therefore her terra firma is also made alive by the same breath, and even that which is thrown on her flesh as an invisible protective net quivers as well. The Earth's cover, rising and falling, woven by myriads of stars, never rests, for stellar matter is fire-breathing too. All worlds are saturated with fire. Where the fire is, there is life. And if there is the desire to live, then it is necessary to absorb the flame which bears within itself a life-affirming seed. The fire inhaled from a space imbued with the breath of the stars fills our breast, nourishing our heart's lotus, wherein the thread of life is fastened, linking the heart with the Creator of the heavens. And if the fiery supply should cease, then the connecting link would break off. The phenomenon characterized by the absence of life-bearing fires began to be termed death. By contrast, everything brimming over with fires bears the symbol of life. For what is fire but life itself? Lakshmi was always breathing. She never knew what it meant to stop breathing, and this is why she was immortal. The fire constituted her fundamental principle, and everything that she touched could become ignited even more strongly, provided it had not lost its life-affirming seed. The woman born in the fiery lotus, of course, was permeated with flames, although she bore within herself all the qualities of the waters. She was destined by the fire and water to create, thus bringing to life everything that was able to live. She washed away the traces of those that rejected fiery gifts, submerging them in the gulf of oblivion, and thereby giving them a chance to rise again from the waters. That part is crazy, because I don't know how many of y'all have heard, but I guess the Gulf of Mexico was on fire, or something like that. Haven't really looked into it, but back to the book. Lakshmi had to remain impassive, maintaining absolute impartiality during the process of spiritual creativity, predestined for her by the one and only. But she was on the earth and could not become stone-like by yielding to human feelings. This eventually brought about the fall of the goddess, when she was filled with great compassion towards fallen souls, allowing her heart to be filled with great pain. It was becoming more and more painful for her to see those who did not perceive the fires of life, and being concerned about their destiny, she descended even lower, into a world ruled by the cold breath of death. Here, Lakshmi began to breathe in imperishable particles interspersed with sparklets of the life-bearing seed. This was a world inhabited by mortal beings, and she became like them. Those who lived where so few fires were in demand appeared as twilight shadows. Anything perishable and transient was short-lived, as the fire embedded by the Creator in the human breast was squandered fast. So, the thread of life, with no new supply of vital currents, tore off, carrying away the soul into the bosom of the radiant fire to replenish what it had lost. Lakshmi knew that if all the living learned to breathe through their hearts, unfolding the petals of their closed lotus buds, then they would all be definitely touched by the gift of immortality. And so she decided to revive these gloomy spheres with her breath, making a fiery inhalation in the fire-breathing world and producing an exhalation in the layers enveloped by the breath of decay. In order to teach hearts to inhale the abundance of fires generously poured forth into the world. It was necessary to multiply the flames of her own heart, thereby paving a new path for others. Those striving towards the fires of life had to learn the great truth about the purpose of human hearts, with the aim of acquiring immortality, as destined by heaven for every creature of God. The lotus of Lakshmi's heart was ripening from the more frequent breath of the goddess who became an earthly human being. Of course, the breath of the gods is the breath of the fire-breathing universe itself, and it differs sharply from the breath of mortals. Unable to assimilate the fire in its pure form, the human respiratory apparatus replaced the heart, which was designed to breathe the flames of eternity. So some kind of evil hand pushed aside what was the main treasure of the world, the human heart. The lotus cannot blossom forth, revealing its marvelous fluorescence, until people realize the entire might of the creative fire that is poured forth abundantly by celestial orbs across the surrounding expanses. And if God has taken a step towards the mortal, then they too should proceed towards their immortality by thinking about the divine. The heart needed help before deciding on a serious step in the direction of the fire. And so to facilitate the awakening of the heart's eye, Lakshmi needed to undertake a great work. She had to find a support point, and she descended to the lowest in order to help people rise to the very highest. And what could assist her in this uneasy task but her own loving heart? The fiery lotus opened its bud, willing to hold in its sweet embrace the whole of earthly humanity, beloved by the goddess of the morning. The flaming spirit of celestial Lakshmi put in an appeal to the heavenly fire, and her heart was filled with reciprocal gifts of heaven, which was grateful that its great daughter had not forgotten the Most High Father. Thus, by its constant appeal to the Supreme, the human heart of the goddess merged with the breath of her cosmic heart, which beats in unison with the breath of the Creator of fire-breathing worlds. Inhaling to the full the fires of universal spheres. Slow moment. This little human being, the earthly woman, comprehended the great truth which had been hidden from her as a mortal being. She discovered herself within herself, thereby immortalizing the name of the goddess of the morning. The heart which becomes able to breathe fires gains 100-eye vision, and it can easily learn about everything that exists throughout creation. The earthly world still continued to breathe, absorbing perishable particles and mixing the sinful with the righteous, i.e., the world lived the same way it had always lived. However, all this was happening on the outward side, while on the inside, mysterious processes of transfiguration were already taking place, for the world was illumined by the fiery breath. This was the goddess who caught her breath, taking a deep inhalation in the spheres of fire. Now she was breathing only what was imperishable, emitting the life-bearing flame from her breast, exuding the fragrance of the unfolded lotus. Exuding the fragrance of the unfolded lotus bud of her fiery heart. All right, we'll be back with, I think this is the last. Yeah, they all have 3 sections, so be back in just a sec. All right, so part 3, chapter 3, the fall of the goddess. Do gods fall? Do they stumble? And can they crash during their fall? Yes. The gods who have climbed to an unreachable height may fall down, yet their conscious falling is simply called a descent into dense matter. After all, in the imperial heights, where they abide, everything has rarefied forms, and a fall from the fire-breathing spheres into layers covered with decay can only be termed a heroic deed. Lakshmi had experienced the rapture of the spirit while soaring into the flaming heights. She had reached such high spheres that the mere mention of them enraptured the spirit. In the depths of secret eons, she would leave and return a few moments later, though somewhere during this same period, billions of years would have passed. The goddess had comprehended what time and timelessness were, and in order to learn what petrified matter represented, she decided to direct her heart's gaze to the world of dense forms. The goddess had fallen from the unattainable height, linking the two worlds, dense and ethereal, with a single light-bearing thread. And although her every touch of stone structures caused acute pain in her breast, making the fiery bud of her heart's lotus shudder, she did not regret the deed she had done. Though the world, of course, forms cruelly wounded the most delicate petals of her heart, it did not evoke any reciprocal anger. Indeed, how could the goddess of love possibly know what dark evil and burning hatred were? Lakshmi's heart was overflowing with love alone, and therefore she could respond in radiance only with what she herself possessed. Gods fall into the valley of stones, yet they do not turn into rocks. After all, they are gods. They have no time to lie still for billions of years, blocking someone's path of advancement. But the goddess that emerged from the waters and was delivered by a flower of eternity to the shores of the earth had risen as a terrestrial flower for the love of the fiery bud. She turned into a marvelous rose whose fragile shoot broke through a solid surface, and, after establishing a great balance between the currents of the two opposite worlds, she stepped right out of those rosebuds into the human kingdom, being born as like from like. And who could weave a subtle garment for her while she was maturing in the womb, still concealing its petrified structure? However, the fruit in the form of her flesh was manifested not as a clot of stone, but as a completely malleable and tender creation. One God less in heaven and one more human being on the earth. Of course, people did not even notice that someone had appeared among them. But when the little girl started to grow, she inadvertently attracted attention to herself. Although, outwardly, she was no different from everyone else. She did have 2 arms and 2 legs, yet an inner something betrayed the fact that she belonged to another world. In the first place, this was expressed in her soft gaze and the tender chest tones of her voice, which seemed to come from the very heart. Nevertheless, when you are not like others, people generally look at you as more of a freak than a god. The little goddess was targeted with bitter mockery and cruel jokes, and she would burn these poisonous arrows on the fire of her loving heart. With all her might, she endeavored to be like everyone else, but for this, she had to lose her bright individuality and merge with the solid gray mass which represented humanity at the dawn of dense matter as it developed and thickened. No matter how much the divine heart is tormented, it is still capable of forgetting the lotus of fiery love, even though the memory of it lies deep and hidden from human view. The light radiating from the breast cannot be stamped out nor degraded, for it bears divine properties within itself. Moreover, it is really possible to trample into the dirt. Moreover, is it really possible to trample into the dirt what is sacred for you just to please the whims of others? The perishable body belongs to dust, and without a murmur, the goddess allowed the hostile world to touch her dense tissue and desecrate the lowest layers of matter. but what belonged to the spirit world was actually sacred and inviolable. The bud of the heart's lotus was guarded above all else, and no one but the gods could come near it. Only they had the right to touch the fiery petals. The perishable body is renewed every 7 years. That's crazy. Because I was thinking about credit reports at that moment, my bad. The perishable body is renewed every 7 years, completely changing the composition of its own matter. But still, like produces like. Matter seemed to be searching for a way to embrace a different structure, yet it lacked a certain ingredient that would enable it to weave firmer threads, leading to greater longevity, so that in pushing off from them, it would be possible to find access to the immortality. The woven flesh is a garment composed of decay and dust slipped over the fiery spirit. Decay and dust do not belong to the gods, and therefore the goddess could not command the body at her discretion. The flesh belonged to the earthly world, which dictated its own laws, subjecting it to the foundations of the reigning matter. The goddess was capable of quickly refining her body and departing into the heavens, yet she had no right to do so, for she was foreordained to traverse the paths of an ordinary earthly creature from Alpha to Omega, and be subject to the impact of perishable currents. To become a human being while staying a goddess is extremely difficult. Yet this task, too, is not entrusted to ordinary people, but to the gods. After all, they alone, their pioneering heroic deeds, are able to help ordinary people become immortal gods. And even earthly matter begins to serve this great goal. 7 years after 7 years, rung after rung, exposing itself to qualitative new renewal. Did the goddess fall low enough? Yes. No one from the gods had ever stooped as low as her lowest point of descent. She experienced such density of layers that earthly matter itself was terrified. But the heart of the goddess withstood this, being squeezed in the grip of gloom, only because the bud of her fiery lotus grew even more in its divine power. Have human hearts understood clearly enough the trust that... Hold on. My bad, y'all. Have human hearts understood clearly enough the truth that the fall of the goddess is actually her ascent? This is how the rungs are formed, which rise up the ladder of divine evolution. The gods ascend through falling down, thereby gaining an altitude much higher than before. And this truth can be doubted only by someone who is incapable of becoming or being a god. So, that's the end of chapter 3. I hope you all enjoyed that. Once again, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe, comment, like, and share. When you do subscribe, turn on the bell notifications, and it's going to give you like 3 options. So just go ahead and click all for that. And I will catch you all next time, which won't be very long. So we'll be in chapter 4. Thank you. And I appreciate everyone who continues to tune in and those who are tuning in for the first time as well. So until then, as always, I love you.